Welcome to Trauma Training Tuesday, COVID edition, the trauma of disabilities. Not that having a disability is traumatic, but the way that you're going to be treated in society can be incredibly traumatic. I'm so excited that my friend Jeff Lafata Hernandez and Krystal Linn are going to be doing this training. They both share my passion for social justice and service. And disability oppression, I think, is one of the least examined, least studied, and a lot of people really don't have the level of awareness that would help them. I know I've learned so much from being on the board of EPIC and working with Jeff and Krystal and Brittany and Judy and so many other people that do this work. And it has really helped me be a better social worker, practitioner, just more inclusive. So I am going to right off the bat turn it on over to the birthday guy, Jeff Lafata Hernandez. It's you.
Thank you, thank you. As Amy said, my name is Jeff Lafata Hernandez. I am the founder and executive director of EPIC, and I'm going to explain EPIC in a moment. My pronouns are he, him, his, and Krystal, do you want to do a quick intro of who you are?
Hi, I am Krystal. I am the youth program specialist in the Worcester community for EPIC. My pronouns are they, them, theirs.
Awesome. So we are going to spend some time with you today talking about trauma of disability, and like Amy said, not of having a disability, but the trauma that happens due to society and you having a disability. So because of that, we added on to the title, calling it Trauma of Disability, Ableism, and Building Inclusion in a Post-COVID World. So we really want to take some time with you all to dive into these topics a little bit and how it may impact your lives and work. But before we do that, I do want to tell you a little bit more about EPIC and who we are. So EPIC stands for Empowering People for Inclusive Communities, and our mission is to prepare young people with disabilities to be actively engaged community leaders through leadership development, through education, leadership development, and community service. And we currently do this through 3 program areas. So our first is our training and consulting. We travel all around New England providing trainings for youth and adults with and without disabilities on topics of disabilities. So those trainings can look very different from us going into Boston public schools, working specifically with students with disabilities and teaching them how to become self-advocates in their education and IEP process, to working with youth workers, AmeriCorps members, other nonprofits on how to work with young people with disabilities or how to make your organizations more inclusive of staff, volunteers, participants with disabilities. In addition to our trainings, we also do consulting, which brings in some of our trainings, but also has us working with organizations to look at their policies and procedures to really make sure that your organization is doing all it can to address ableism, to be accessible for folks, and to help, ultimately for us, diversify your workforce. In addition to that, our signature program is called EPIC Service Warriors. So EPIC Service Warriors is a community service and leadership development program for young people with disabilities in both Boston and Worcester. It is a 1-year program. Typically the program runs from April to April. That has clearly been put on pause at the moment. But it is a 12-month program where young people between the ages of 16 and 23 with any type of disability sign on for a year of service with EPIC. And so they do community service projects, everything from cleaning parks, feeding the homeless, painting schools, and through those projects, really becoming re-engaged in their communities and learning employment and independent living skills through the process. Also, they do leadership development days. So we do training days with these young leaders to help give them the tools that they need to reach their future goals. So they go to an adaptive ropes course and learn about team building and communication. They go to Worcester and Boston City Hall and meet with local politicians and all become registered to vote. They learn about disability history, financial literacy, a whole variety of topics to really engage these young leaders in their communities, and so that the community at large can begin to see the young leaders that these people are. Quick plug, we are currently recruiting for this program. So if you do know of any young people, again, 16 to 23, any type of disability, please encourage them to go to our website, epicleaders.org. That's going to pop up at the end of the PowerPoint as well. And they can apply online for the program. There is an application process. They have to interview and get a recommendation before being accepted. But we're currently recruiting, and we will this Thursday on EPIC's Facebook, which again will show up at the end of the PowerPoint. We're going to be doing a virtual open house. So we'll have EPIC staff, current warriors from both cities, and alumni sharing their experience and answering questions live on Facebook for any young people, parents, guardians, teachers who are interested in learning more about the program, Thursday at 6. Last, our third program area is our youth support groups. So we currently in Boston run 2 groups a month, Epic Youth Night and Queer Able. These are groups open to any young person with a disability, 14 to 26 years old. And these are youth-led adult supported groups. So we have peer leaders who are trained, and they design and run each group, and staff is just there to provide the support that they need. Our goal was to start these in Worcester in 2020, but given COVID, we don't know when we'll be starting these in Worcester, but it is on our agenda. They will be coming to Worcester. Last thing is in our programs is because of COVID, we have turned to virtual programming. So on the screen right now shows you 6 of the different groups that we're doing. Some of these groups are open to any young person with a disability, 14 to 26 years old. Some of these are specific for EPIC youth who are currently enrolled or alumni. But if you are interested in learning more about our virtual groups for young people that you may know who want to get involved with EPIC right now, please reach out to Krystal or I afterwards. And again, our contact info will be on that last slide. So we are going to jump in and talk about disabilities and ableism and the experience of people with disabilities during COVID-19 and things to think about to really promote inclusion and accessibility in a post-COVID world. But before we do that, I want to do a couple quick norms for the group. So everyone has been put on mute, and we're going to ask that people stay on mute just because of background noise right now. However, Krystal and I love questions. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat box. Amy is on chat box duty, and she will jump in and share the questions that you all have. We also do acknowledge that the chat box is not the most accessible tool out there. So if the chat box is not accessible to you, if you click on the participant box that should be on the bottom of your screen, when that pops up, there's a hand raise button. If you press that hand raise button, Amy will call on you, will unmute you so that you can share your question verbally, if that's more accessible for you. The last thing I'm going to say is that I know and hope that this is a very understanding and open group. And we do want to just say that we understand that people joining this have very different experiences with disability. Some of us identify as people with disabilities, some of us don't. Some of us work in the disability field. Some of us have no experience with disability. So please feel free to ask whatever questions you have. There's no bad questions. We don't want you all right now to be worried about what's the correct way to say this or ask this. Just ask the question as you're thinking it. And as we go through the training, we'll talk more about what is the appropriate language and things like that to use. But for the purpose of this training, we just want to have open dialogue. So please feel free to share whatever questions and thoughts that you have in that chat box. So with that, I think I hit all my points. I'm going to pass it off to Krystal.
Hello, everybody. To start off, I think we're going to do a quick activity. We call this activity Disabilities A to Z. We are going to break people off into separate breakout rooms. And everybody's going to get about 3 minutes. And in these groups, you're going to write down as many disabilities that you can think of. So these are any disabilities from, physical, mental health, or learning disabilities. We are going to ask that each group, though, does kind of like identify a scribe to write everything down. So when we get back together, we can all share those things together. So I think we're going to try to break off now.
Okay, this breakout room thing is new for me, so I think it's going to work fine, and you're all going to find yourselves in small group. It really does take the full minute. Like you can't like make it go faster. If you're like, come on, where are they?
Well, yeah, because it gives, as soon as you click it, it gives people an option to leave the room at that point.
Oh, okay.
It works.
But the full minute is if they don't click the leave the room after a minute, it automatically bumps them back.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. It worked though.
It did work. That's such great news.
It worked.
That is like a new like star in my Zoom repertoire now. I feel really excited that we did that successfully. Jeff, do you need me to do anything in this part, or are you going to ask people to do the shares of what they did and I'll be quiet?
I think Krystal's going to ask, yeah, for the scribes to share.
All right, Krystal, I will mute myself.
Awesome. So I think that everybody's back now from their groups. I am going to ask somebody from each group, the scribe, whoever was designated as the scribe, to share what they had in their group. If somebody would like to begin that process, I think Amy can unmute you.
Hey, it's Delia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I was the scribe for group 4. And I actually apologize. I have a hard stop at 12:30, so I'm going to drop. That's why I was like, oh, I'll go first. So we came up with, we bucketed the disabilities into 3 areas: physical, intellectual, psychological. From a physical perspective, we listed out those ones, that people can clearly see. So like cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, being a paraplegic, missing limbs, being deaf or hearing impaired, blind or sight impaired. Autoimmune is a physical, but it's not necessarily as visible. But we did list autoimmune disorders as well, things like Raynaud's or whatnot, under the physical. From an intellectual standpoint, we had listed learning disabilities or cognitive impairments, things like autism, sensory processing disorder, but we didn't get very far on that list because that was the last one we had talked about. And then from a psychological perspective, we had discussed things like depression, PTSD, anxiety, trauma, different personality disorders would fall into the category of psychological. That's all I got. Thank you, Group 4. Nice working with you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. I did want to add that if for any reason somebody lists a disability that you don't quite, I don't want to use the word agree, but you don't believe may be a disability, and you would like to kind of challenge our thinking, you can put that into the chat box and we'll address that after we're all done reading off the disabilities. So somebody from one of the other groups, a scribe, would like to share with us?
Jasmine has raised their hand.
Okay. And Jasmine, if you would share anything that maybe wasn't already listed.
All right. So we didn't break it down into any specific categories, but something that wasn't shared, we had bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, ADHD, spina bifida, arthritis, Tourette's, Alzheimer's, and dementia.
Great.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Somebody from one of the other groups would like to share?
Sarah has raised their hand. I've unmuted you.
Hi, I think just adding to what has already been shared, we had visual impairments or reading disabilities, auditory processing, physical ailments such as colitis, Crohn's disease, and substance use disorder.
Someone else? Shane? I see Shane. You can, yeah, unmute
All
yourself.
right, cool beans. To be honest with you, don't remember what number group I was in, but it was a group full of lovely people. I think, I don't know, y'all may have covered everything that we have here, but we have learning disabilities, physical disabilities, neurological or intellectual disabilities, mental or psychological disabilities, being deaf or hard of hearing, blind or sight impaired, autism, and we have chronic pain as well.
Is there, sorry, Amy, how many groups did we have total?
We had 5, I think. Jonathan Hardy-Lavoie was a spokesperson too. I just unmuted him.
I was in number 6, so we definitely had at least 6.
Okay.
So we had 6.
So a lot of the things have already been mentioned that we brainstormed. I don't remember if anyone said schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, endometriosis, neurofibromatosis, eating disorders, learning disorders, processing disorders, reactive attachment disorder, PTSD, and chromosomal disorders.
Awesome, thank you so much. So then I believe we have one more group that hasn't yet spoken. Who was the scribe for that last group?
It was my group. I think my group was confused about what to do. I mean, they did it on their own, so we didn't really talk.
Okay. That's right. Rachel, did you have anything to add maybe that wasn't said?
I do not.
How about anybody from Rachel's group? Did you come up with anything on your own personal list that haven't yet been said?
Okay.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for sharing your lists and working with your group to come up with some disabilities that we are all, and all those they were all disabilities. Yeah, we're gonna. Perfect. So we are going to define the term disabilities, and we're going to use the terminology from the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which states that a disability or a person with disability, an individual with a disability, is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of their life activities. So to understand that, we have to then describe what is a major life activity and what the definition of substantially limits. So major life activities include, but of course not limited to, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, bending, speaking or breathing, learning, reading, concentration, thinking, communicating, and working. So these are the functions that are important to a person's daily life. To define substantially limits, these are things that one is unable or restricted, significantly restricted to perform a life activity that the average person, and I know that's kind of a term that's a little loosely done, but in the general population can perform as a condition in a manner or duration under which the individual can perform a particular major life activity compared to the average person. So I think moving on from.
So can I add really quick to that?
Of course.
So when I think of substantially limits, I tend to just simplify it in thinking of severity and duration. Okay, and the reason why I do that is because some of these things, everything that was listed is a disability and does fit under this definition of disability. However, due to the severity, it may not, for an individual, qualify as a disability. So one example I often give is that I have arthritis. My arthritis at this point in my life does not substantially limit my daily life activities, and therefore for me, my arthritis is not a disability. However, in 10 years, it could be. So there are, because of that substantially limits the severity and duration, that can really distinguish whether an individual's diagnosis does qualify as a disability or not, because the overarching diagnosis could. I hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, please feel free to put questions in the chat box. The other thing that we do want to clarify here with this is we are talking about a definition to get us all on a foundation of understanding for the rest of this training. This definition, though, does not signify identity. Just because someone has a disability that fits under this definition does not mean that they as an individual identify as having a disability or being a person with a disability. And that happens both individually and within some communities of people that are covered. And one example I often give is the deaf community. The deaf community does not identify as people with disabilities. As a community, they identify as being a language and cultural minority. However, there are individuals within the deaf community that do individually identify as people with disabilities. So we just want to be clear that this definition and fitting under this definition does not necessarily equal someone identifying as having a disability or being a person with a disability.
So we are briefly going to discuss the difference between the medical and the social model of disabilities. The medical model states that a person is disabled due to the condition of their mind or body, when the social model is a person is disabled due to the way our society is organized and structured. So that's really important to distinguish the difference. Because the medical model says that the disability is in your body and that, you know, you are the problem, where the medical model says that the disability exists with the interaction between the individual and the society itself.
The social model.
What was that?
The social model. You said the medical model.
Oh, I'm so sorry. The social model. I am so sorry. I lost my train of thought. I apologize. So the social model is, so people who with disabilities, they are disabled from the barriers within society. And this model puts the focus on the individual and their unique needs and their conditions. And it creates more of a person-centered approach and a more positive approach to disabilities within our society. You know, going back to the medical model, that's one where we find a problem or a disease and we attempt to fix that. I like in pointing out, actually going back to the ADA definition, they actually use the medical model in their definition. And they use that with the word, with the word impaired. And we see where the social model, it reacts more towards the person and to how they react within society and how society reacts to them. So by creating a better society, we kind of create a position or a world for people with disabilities to interact in a more, I'm so sorry, in a way that's more natural for our society.
So yeah, with the social and medical model, the medical model is very much about, and we know this is medicine is about finding the issue and fixing the issue, right? So in the medical model of disability, there's an issue with your mind or body that we want to fix. And you can see that very much in the way that we often look at disability and talk about disability and what people need to do with disabilities to assimilate, right? That's, someone needs to get a cochlear implant, right? Let's teach them how to walk. Let's teach them how to talk, because that's what we feel like they need to do to be fixed and to assimilate into society. Whereas the social model is saying there's nothing wrong with your mind or your body, and that it's the structures that we've built, both physical structures and the way our society is structured culturally, that is the problem. And so we need to fix that. So our world very much functions on a medical model right now, but the disability rights movement is about a social model. And we at EPIC are really trying to help people move to that social model to understand there is nothing wrong with disability and people with disabilities. It's the structures that we've built. And when Amy at the beginning of this training talked about trauma of disability and making the distinction of the trauma is about the way people with disabilities are treated in our society, not the disability itself, that's really what this is getting to, right? That it's the social model. It's not because of me, it's because of the society and the structures in this society. Before we move on to the next part, Amy, do we have any questions?
Yeah, Jeff, I got a question about kind of the learned behavior of this piece. I'm not sure if they were asking about, does society teach us this? Do we kind of figure it out ourselves? But if you could speak to that piece, the learned behavior of disability.
Okay, I don't know if I fully understand the question.
Yeah, I don't think I'm expressing it very well, but I guess that kind of, I loved that idea you had about the problem is in society, not in the person, when we look at medical versus social. And that society is, you know, kind of where we learn. It's the water we swim in. So it can be really hard to tease out how it would look if we weren't taught that it was a problem. I think that's where they were going, but I'm not entirely sure.
We're about to start talking about ableism, and I think some clarity will come with that, but ableism, like any other system of oppression, are things that were learned. Either outwardly, forwardly told certain things about groups of people, or it's just inherent in our society, right? And so we have been shown what is the ideal norm of a human being, right? And whether that is body type, skin color, gender identity, or disability status, right? So those messages are fed to us from the moment we are born, and that plays into this medical and social model. So just like we tell people they need to lose weight to fit this body type, we're telling them to fix things instead of saying as a society, we are looking at this culturally wrong, right? It's the same idea of saying we need to teach someone who does not speak orally how to speak, instead of saying we're looking at communication wrong in our society and how do we become more accessible. So I think there are messages that are taught to us from the moment we're born. Any other questions, Amy, before I move on?
Not that I can see right off the bat, but I think that was really a good, and I know you're going to talk a lot more about that. People have just in the chat bar made the observations about that idea of, you know, it's not your problem, it's society's problem.
Right. Okay, great. So now we want to talk about ableism. The definition of ableism that we use at EPIC is ableism is a system of advantage and discrimination based on ability or perceived ability. So to really break this down really quickly, discrimination we know is the action of, I am not going to hire you. I don't think you should get X, Y, and Z, right? I might commit a hate crime. I am going to take an action against you because of your ability status. System of advantage is in terms of power, privilege, and oppression, just like any ism. Racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, heterosexism, classism. There is a system of advantage built in our culture and our society against people with disabilities, right? And just like any ism, some of these things are very easy to see and some of these things are not, right? So we want to do a little activity with all of you right now to look at how ableism may or may not affect your life personally, and to start thinking about the effects of ableism in our society and culture. Before I do that, as I prep to do that, does anyone have any questions on this definition of ableism?
Okay, may I jump in? Hi, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Linn Russell. I'm a health champion. You were talking about a subject of socialism. The African American community is just not being helped in ways where they deserve, especially when it comes to mental illness. Either they don't have the tools or someone to help them. Particularly when I come across people and they're having mental issues, I refer them to Boston, Fenway, Beth Israel, because of the fact these hospitals and these organizations in Boston, they listen. They don't, it's like no heat, no judgment. They listen because they let the patient be the CEO of every meeting. They sit them at the head of the table. They said, now, tell us what's going on. We're listening. We're here. And I've sent so many people to Boston, and let me tell you something. It was like they went in one way and they came out another. And that's the awesome thing about Boston. Worcester doesn't listen. It's just like they sending them in circles, and that's just not right. Mm-hmm. So what I do, I'm connected to Fenway organization, Beth Israel, all those hospitals up there I am connected to. And like I said, it's sort of like they go in broken pieces. I don't know if you understand that term. There's one piece one way, there's one piece the other way. There's in the mind is the most important piece. And they say, okay, how can we fix this? How can we help them? And I have been amazed at all the people that I have sent to Boston. I set up transportation services, mental health services, any kind of services they need, and they even give them acupuncture. The ones that suffer from like PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenic, and all of like therapy. You know what what I mean? They say, okay, what would you like to do? Well, I would like to go to a spa or have that spa term. They do it. And let me tell you, I've sent like 50 people and they're working. They've gotten their own apartments. It's sort of like a balance. How can we balance all this out? How many more are being overlooked in terms of when it comes to mental health? Especially in the African American community and the Latino community as well. Sorry, I meant to throw that in too. They're just being overlooked. No one's listening. No one's helping. So I just said, I called my connection in Boston and I said, hey, I have a couple of people that really need some help. She said, Lynn, just, have them call me. We'll set up an appointment. The first person they talk to is Michael. Michael is the intake. And sometimes what it's called, it's sort of like a distress, like when you're, and he talks to them, and that's how the intake process begins. So it's like, I've sent so many people and they have come out and they're still going to their appointments. You know, sometimes the appointment is weekly. It depends. First, they do it weekly. They'll do it weekly for 6 months, and then they'll do it like every 2 weeks, and then you know, so on and so forth. It depends on the patient's, you know, requirements. And I just feel Boston, even for me, I go there for my neurologist, the top neurologist in the world, and I go to Northampton because I've had three traumas to the brain. And
Lynn, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think we want to, I think your point is really well taken. Jeff and I were talking about that before we started, that Worcester's ranking in terms of livability for people with disabilities is not at all where it should be. And that is, you know, part of the intention of doing something like this is to help us learn and do a much better job. And I'm sad to hear you've had such bad experiences in Worcester.
No, I never had any doctors in Worcester. I've always gone to Boston, and the thing is, I think Worcester, you know, when it comes to disabilities, they can do better, Amy. They really can, because so many people go unseen, and that's just wrong.
Mhm.
It's
Absolutely
really wrong.
agree.
They deserve jobs. Just because they got disabilities, they have hope in their heart and in their spirits, and they want to belong, and they want to make money just like everybody else, Amy. They want to belong. People, you know, society talks about them in terms like they're shadows. No, they're not shadows. They're human beings. Just we're all human beings, and they have just as more spirit than we do, and they just want a chance and someone to listen and help them. That's all. And that being said, you guys are awesome.
Thank you, Lynn. And I think you also bring up some really great points around intersectionality. I do want to be clear, although we're talking about disability today, the experience of Black and brown people with disabilities is very different than the experience of white people with disabilities. The experience of LGBTQ people with disabilities is very different than straight cis people with disabilities, right? So although we're talking about disability as the main topic today, we do need to look at this from an intersectional lens and realize that access to resources, the access to supports for people depending on their full identity will change the story and how people are able to navigate the world and getting the resources that they need. So we're going to move into this activity. I'm going to ask that you all be flexible with us. We usually pride ourselves on being super interactive trainings, and now we got to figure out how to do it on Zoom. So we, unfortunately, because this isn't our account, we could not set up the poll feature the way we wanted to for today. So we are going to read a series of statements, and if you all actually click on the little participant box on the bottom, you're hopefully seeing an option that says yes and no in there. Please? Okay, good. So I'm going to read a statement, and I'm going to ask you if the statement is true for you to click the yes, if it's no for you to click the no, okay? I'm going to ask that you answer these based on your personal lived experience, not that of your partner, a coworker, a friend, your child, but you as an individual. Lastly, you're going to hear me use the phrase physical, mental, and emotional self. I want you to think of that in terms of the definition of disability, okay? Not for the purpose of this activity, I don't want you to think of race, gender, sexual orientation, other pieces of your identity. I want you to solely answer this based on your ability status. And like with anything today, if you choose not to answer any statement, you don't have to. It's anonymous, well, pseudo-anonymous, I think. So if you don't feel comfortable answering a statement or answering any of them, you don't have to, okay? So first up, people do not question my intelligence based on my physical, mental, or emotional self. Yes or no? People do not question my intelligence based on my physical, mental, or emotional self. So I think everyone can see it, but we have 13 people who have said yes and 11 who have said no. Next statement. I have to think about physical accessibility when going to a new place. Yes or no? I have to think about physical accessibility when going to a new place. We have 7 yeses and 19 nos. Next up, my parents and teachers always expected me to go to college. Yes or no? So 19 yeses and 6 nos. People have used the words retarded, crippled, crazy, or ill to classify me. We have 9 yeses and 18 nos, 19 nos. Next up, I believe that I was not hired for a job due to my physical, mental, or emotional self. I believe I was not hired for a job due to my physical, mental, or emotional self. So we have 4 yeses and 21 nos. Others assume that I am not capable of making my own life decisions. Others assume that I am not capable of making my own life decisions. We have 3 yeses and 21 nos, 4 yeses, 22 nos. I have been told or made to feel that I need to be cured, fixed, prayed for, or that I should have never been born due to my physical, mental, or emotional self. I've been told or made to feel that I need to be cured, fixed, prayed for, or that I should have never been born due to my physical, mental, or emotional self. We have 9 yeses and 17 nos. Next up, I can turn on the TV and read books or magazines and be sure that I will see people operating with similar abilities to myself. I can turn on the TV or read books and magazines and be sure I will see people operating with similar abilities to myself. 18 yeses and 4 nos. I am sure that when I move to a new location, I will be able to find both a physical and I am sure that when I move to a new location, I'll be able to find both an accessible workplace and residence. I'm sure that when I move to a new location, I'll be able to find both an accessible workplace and residence. 21 yeses and 4 nos. I have ever had to take daily medication due to my physical, mental, or emotional self. I have ever had to take daily medication due to my physical, mental, or emotional self. $19 yeses, 20 yeses, and 6 nos. In order to enter a building or business, I have had to enter through the service entrance or be taken past dumpsters to gain access. In order to enter a building or business, I have had to enter through the service entrance or be taken past dumpsters to gain access. 5 yeses, 21 nos. I can go into any restaurant and find something on the menu that I can eat, and it will be served in a form that I can eat without too much difficulty. I can go into any restaurant and find something on the menu that I can eat, and it will be served in a form that I can eat without too much difficulty. 23 yeses and 2 nos. And last question. Others question the appropriateness of my right to be a sexual being or parent due to my physical, mental, or emotional self. Others question the appropriateness of my right to be a sexual being or parent due to my physical, mental, or emotional self. 4 yeses and 19 nos. So I want to thank you for all participating in that and hanging in there with that semi-good technology to answer this. But I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into the different ways that ableism affects people's life, right? Whether that is, I, as someone who does not have a physical disability, I can walk through the front entrance of every restaurant and business I go to. However, I have friends who are taken past dumpsters, are led through the back entrance because the front is not accessible, right? I have friends who go into restaurants and because of severe life-threatening allergies cannot order anything on the menu, right? And as much as a wait staff says, oh, I'll take care of it, don't worry, there's been too many times we have to call 911 and whip out that EpiPen. From the terminology that we used around people with disabilities, to us trusting people having the ability to make their own life decisions and to be sexual beings, right? These are all things that we as humans have a right to that oftentimes people with disabilities don't. I do see a whole bunch of things popping up. Judy, do we have any questions, comments?
Well, Brittany made a comment in the chat bar that even though she has a teaching license in Worcester, she's not able to use it because the majority of the schools are not accessible to her. And that, you know, is kind of a mind blower and not okay. It looked like, you know, most of the comments, I think I've done this activity before with you, and some of those things really stand out and stick with you about how much that would negatively impact your life to not have those things that we take for granted if we are able-bodied and minded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and accessibility, Brittany's example, is very real. So at this time, all EPIC staff identify as people with disabilities, and we all have different disabilities. And there are times that some of our trainers go out to teach at a school, and because they use a wheelchair, they show up at the school and they can't access the building. And suddenly we have to cancel a training for young people with disabilities because the school's not accessible, right? It's things that people don't think about every day that is a reality for people with disabilities, depending on what your disability is. How often can you go to a restaurant and get a menu in Braille if you need it, right? How often do you go to open community events and there are not sign language interpreters there for folks who need it? So this activity is normally done in a fashion in person where it's done as a privilege line. And I only read about 12 statements out of what is normally about 30 to 35 statements. That helps give a visual representation to the power and privilege you may have as a person without a disability, and even the different privileges that come with different types of disabilities, right? So I hope this gives a little insight into some of the many ways that ableism affects folks' lives. Ryan, I see you raising your hand. Oh, I think Amy and I are both trying to unmute you at the same time, and so we're muting and unmuting you. All right, Ryan, you are unmuted.
So one of the things, like Jeff said, I've done this training, like, would you say like 2,000 times?
You've done it a lot. Ryan is a former EPIC staff, so he's also helped to teach this training before.
So one of the things that I always it when I do this training, it depends on how I woke up and what day I'm having. And like today it wasn't too bad, but other days the questions will hit home like really bad. And so I wanted to touch, this goes into what that you had the girl that was talking before, the woman that was talking before we did this, and it kind of goes on to like, she was saying like things aren't accessible, they should be. Well, unfortunately, a lot of that is you have to take the burden on yourself to make things accessible. Like I wrote to her in the chat bar that I was the first person ever to go to Grafton Public School Systems in a wheelchair, and they built the elevator just for me. And I had a walkie-talkie that I would talk to my classroom because I couldn't go upstairs. So you know, I had a lot, and when I talked about that a lot with Jeff, and you know, we thought in the 90s it would be better, but it's not. I mean, and I think that's something we're gonna find as people with disabilities. It's I don't think it's ever gonna be enough. I think it's gonna be changes, but I think there's gonna be more and more changes as new things come along, as new technology comes along. I don't know if you guys know, but Uber and Lyft weren't always accessible, and now they're starting, and there's not enough still. Like if I go to Worcester, I can't take a Lyft home because they're not in Worcester. So I think as far as that, there's always going to be changes, and that's why places like Epic are good to do these things. But what I'm trying to say is that I also, if you feel comfortable making a change yourself, you can. It's hard, but you can, and you might have some letdowns, but you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ryan. Sorry. So yeah, thank you, Ryan. These are great points. I think that as people with disabilities, it's up to us to decide where and how we want to advocate. But again, remembering that it's not the responsibility of people with disabilities to teach people without about ableism. Just like it's not the responsibility of people of color to teach me, a white person, about racism, right? If you as an individual choose to take that responsibility and choose to do that, so be it, more power to you. But remembering that as allies for the folks who do not identify as people with disabilities, or even within the disability community, our communities and the types of disabilities are so different. To be allies across the community means that we need to look at ourselves and we need to amplify the voices of those. Oftentimes when it comes to people with disabilities, everyone speaks for them, because it goes back to that idea of they don't have the ability to make their own life decisions. People with disabilities don't know what they're talking about. And as allies within and outside of the community, we need to amplify the voices of people with disabilities. So in the interest of time, we do want to move forward and give you a little bit more content around how to address ableism and inclusion, both generally and giving you some quick tips of things to think about, but also talking a little bit about experiences of people with disabilities and COVID-19 and things to think about as we move forward to whatever our new normal is going to be. Really quickly, I do want to give you some quick stats that kind of show the cycle of ableism. So 1 in 5 Americans has some form of a disability. 35% of youth with disabilities are completely uninvolved in their communities. Youth with disabilities are 4 times more likely to become involved in the juvenile justice system. 22% of youth with disabilities do not complete high school, compared to 9% without disabilities. 80% of youth with learning disabilities are bullied at school. This frequency is greater for youth with disabilities that affect their appearance. 71% of working age Americans with disabilities are unemployed and want to work, and this is clearly a stat pre-COVID. And people with disabilities are the largest minority group living in poverty today. So we see a cycle. We know that young people who are engaged in their communities do better in school. We know youth who make it through school, whether they go on to higher education or not, have a higher likelihood of getting a good job, that they can sustain their lifestyle and hopefully break the cycle of poverty. So there's a clear cycle here that we at EPIC are trying to work with the community at large, as well as young people with disabilities, to break this cycle. You can also see, going back to the topic of intersectionality, how intersectionality may play in here. Going to stat number 3 around the juvenile justice system, youth who are Black and brown who have disabilities are more likely to go into the juvenile justice system than their peers who are white with the same disability, right? Youth with disabilities who are Black and brown are more likely to be suspended from school than their peers who are white. So it is important that as we're talking about disability, we continue to look at it through an intersectional lens. Some quick things before we move on to inclusion tips is things to think about as we are all navigating COVID-19 stay-at-home orders. And the experience for folks with disabilities. So first off is the accessibility of tips to prevent COVID-19. And this comes in many different ways. One is the language and how we're giving these tips. Is it accessible to folks with learning and cognitive disabilities? Images are great, right? But are we also describing images so that both people who learn better through seeing are getting that, but also people who are blind know what these images are, right? But also thinking of the basic tips, right? Washing your hands for 20 seconds thoroughly for some people with physical disabilities is not possible to do independently, right? We're all putting up, or will be putting up, way more Purell dispensers in our offices when we return to work. Is that accessible, right? If it's up high, people who use wheelchairs are not going to be able to access it, right? So thinking about some of these basic tips. Masks are not always accessible or create a difficult obstacle, right? We've seen, I think, the big thing that goes around on social media is the folks who are creating masks that you can read someone's lips, right? For people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Masks can be very difficult for folks with sensory stuff. So it could be very irritating, someone can't wear it. If you already have a condition where it's difficult for you to breathe, right? So navigating what accommodations can be made for people with masks and without masks is a difficult spot right now. Next, people who rely on assistance for ADLs or activities for daily living. If someone has a personal care attendant that doesn't live with them and is coming into their home, what are the concerns around bringing the virus into their home and not realizing it? But also, what are the concerns and what happens if that PCA is suddenly too scared to come into your home or gets ill and is unable to come into your home, right? And the quality of care and safety that that individual needs could disappear, and the fear around that. Discrimination within healthcare. There is always a level of discrimination that people with disabilities face. And I know Linn was talking about services in Boston compared to Worcester and other parts of the state. I do think that no matter where you go, there are definitely more resources available in Boston than anywhere else in the state. But no matter where you go, there is still a reality of medical professionals often don't listen to people with disabilities because, again, they think they don't know. Although no one knows their body better than they do, they still turn to their parents, to their partners, to their PCAs, whoever it might be, and they're asking them the questions and not the individual with a disability. So the quality of care they may get, but then also the straight up quality of care and discrimination that may come into play if ventilators are at stake and someone has to decide whose life is more worthy than another's, right? And is disability becoming a factor? Is the 20-year-old with Down syndrome's life now no longer equal to the 60-year-old who doesn't have a disability, right? And so fears around that for folks. And the last thing we have on here is trauma of quarantine. And I think we are all experiencing trauma as we go through this, but we also need to take into account the traumas that individuals with disabilities might be facing. One is this is a community of people who still is segregated from our world at higher degrees than anybody else. And so for people to suddenly lose that support system and access they had, whether that be the schools that they go to, the work programs that they are in, the disability organizations that they are part of, to lose access to that can be really difficult. Folks who are older with intellectual disabilities who were once institutionalized and are now quarantined in their homes, although those homes aren't institutions, what past trauma can that bring back for folks? And then also people with disabilities, as far as abuse and neglect go, people with disabilities experience this at higher rates than anybody. Men with physical disabilities are sexually assaulted at higher rates than women without disabilities. So we know that this is very real in general, but now people are put in positions where they're being quarantined with family members and care attendants who are abusive. And so we are seeing a spike in reports of people with disabilities experiencing abuse and neglect during this time. I keep seeing the chat pop up. Amy, if there are questions, feel free to jump in because we're going to keep moving because of time, but if there's questions, we want to hear them.
Nope, you can keep moving. Mostly it's just comments.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to pass it off to Krystal to start leading us in some of the discussion around inclusion and accessibility.
So we have the definition of inclusion up. Inclusion is the attitude and the approach that seeks to ensure that every person, regardless of ability or background, can meaningfully participate in all aspects of life. So the two words or phrases that we want to really focus on with this definition is the word attitude and meaningful participate. So attitude explains how this goes beyond just the understanding of inclusion, but goes to building a culture of inclusion and understanding. So our attitude about inclusion really does make the difference. And meaningfully participates is how important it is for all people to find meaning and purpose in what they are doing. Inclusion for people with disabilities are that they meaningfully participate and engage, and it's just not outside there watching what is happening, that they are actually a part of what is going on in their circles and in their life, and making those decisions for themselves, and not just kind of sitting off into the background. You know, inclusion is not just being there, it's actually participating, is kind of what I want to say. So accessibility refers to all aspects which influence a person's ability to function within the environment, or to measure how simply a person can participate in an activity. When we talk about disabilities based on diagnosis, we want to make sure that we're understanding that, you know, it's not how, we're not defining that for a person. Just because somebody in the community just because the community or the defines somebody with a disability doesn't mean that that person themselves defines with having a disability. And also back to accessibility, it's not just ramps or automatic doors, it's how we provide accessibility to our buildings and our organizations. So it's including people by making our programs accessible. So from the language that we're using, providing literature possibly in Braille, having sign or language interpreters. It includes the heights of our tables, even, you know, with the COVID, the heights of sanitizers, hand sanitizers, and other activities that we have, and making sure that those are accessible to everybody.
So to build off of what Krystal was just saying around accessibility, there's 5 areas that we encourage people to think about, right? And we want you to start thinking about how your programs in your offices function now, as well as we transition into this new normal. So one is architectural. I am not expecting you all to return to your offices, cut your leases, and move someplace that's accessible. But when it is time for you to go to a new office or purchase a new building or whatever it might be, really making sure you're taking physical accessibility into account. Also, when you're planning community events, are you holding them in places and renting spaces that are physically accessible for everybody? Programmatic. So again, looking at policies and procedures within your organizations and how you run your programs. Are they accessible, right? Are you providing reasonable accommodations to folks who need them? How are you teaching materials? Are you working with individuals to ensure that everything you're doing is accessible? Technology, we all tend to think of technology as computers and phones and tablets and expensive things. Technology does not have to be expensive or fit that definition when we're talking about accessibility. When people talk about assistive technology could be as simple as a pencil grip for someone, right? So really just thinking about what are the different uses of technology that we can put into place to make it more accessible. Zoom is a perfect example, right? A lot of places before COVID-19 said to people with disabilities who would ask as an accommodation to work from home, that's not possible in this job. Suddenly it's been real possible for all of us, right? So looking at what is possible by using technology. Communications, again, like some of the stuff Krystal said, how are we communicating information for folks, both from the language that we're using and the accessibility of that language? How do we utilize social media? Are we using things like image descriptions for folks who are blind on social media? And then alternative formats. Again, thinking, can we put stuff in Braille, in large prints? Can we use pictures? How are the different formats that we're communicating things to folks? Next, I told you all not to worry about language at the beginning of this, but I do want you to worry about it in life in general. And we know that with any group of people, language is evolving and changing, right? So there's definitely terms that are no longer appropriate. The word retarded used to be an appropriate term to use. It was a medical diagnosis. Over the years, that has changed. That is no longer the appropriate term to use for anyone, but especially people with intellectual and cognitive disabilities, right? So being aware of how language has changed. And the one thing I want to quickly point out is person first versus identity first language. At this point, I think everyone knows what person first language is, but it's about putting the person before the disability. So a man with autism or a person with a disability, opposed to identity first language that puts the disability first. So a disabled man, an autistic child, right? There are cases on both sides of the fence of which one of these to use. We at EPIC are not going to tell you you should use one over the other, right? There's been pushes within certain parts of the disability community of really wanting person first, and there's been pushes in other parts of the community of identity first. What we're going to say to you is use whatever is most comfortable for you until you hear a person self-identify, right? So I may always say a person with autism, but as soon as a young person I work with says I'm autistic, from that point on, I will refer to that person as autistic, just like you would with pronouns, right? Once you know someone's pronouns, you're always using those pronouns. So that's something we want you all to keep in mind as far as language goes. Next is some general tips we give to folks in our inclusion trainings in general. And the first one is huge for us. Disability is not a dirty word. We like to come up with all these cute things to say instead of disability. Special needs, differently abled, handy capable. No. Okay. And here's why. One, these are terms that generally people without disabilities are creating to make themselves feel better. And that's coming from a place of ableism. That's coming from a place of pity. I see the word disability as bad, and so I want to make you feel better. Whereas disability, the word, the term, the identification can be empowerment, right? To be able to identify, I am a person with a disability, I am disabled, is just as empowering as being able to say, I am Black, I am queer, I am trans, I am a woman, right? And we don't want to rob people of that opportunity. Also, just like any community, the disability community has a history, a movement, that if we don't let people identify with that word, we are also robbing them of that community, that movement, and that history. Next is to presume competence. One part of ableism that we are all taught is that someone with a disability may not be competent, right? We automatically may assume, because, especially if we can visibly see a disability, we make assumptions about someone's intellectual capacity, right? And what happens when we do that is we suddenly change our language and our tone of voice. And it goes from me speaking to a peer, like I'm speaking to you now, to me talking to you like this, buddy, right? And really being aware of our tone of voice and the way we speak. So presume competence. When we work with young people at EPIC, we go in using one set of language. And if we realize that a young person's not understanding our language and the way we're phrasing things, we'll change the language to meet them where they're at, but we're not changing our tone of voice. Next, pity doesn't help anybody. I think that we often talk about systems of oppression at EPIC, and we say oppression is oppression. There's no hierarchy of oppression, right? Racism is not more important than ableism. Ableism is not more important than heterosexism. But we acknowledge that all of these isms have a different history and they show themselves differently. And I think one of the ways that ableism shows itself differently is that people feel bad for other people because of the state of their mind or body, right? Where as a white person, I may feel bad about the system of oppression that I play a role in towards people of color, but I don't feel bad because of your skin tone, right? But with ableism, we usually don't think about the system of oppression, and we feel bad that you use a wheelchair. We feel bad that you're deaf, right? And so that when we do that, that pity shows. You are no longer my peer. You are no longer my equal if I feel bad for you and how your body and mind works. Don't assume someone needs assistance. Ask, and then the key here is if they say yes, ask them how to assist them. We need to make sure that every person has agency over their own body, right? And so oftentimes people swoop in thinking that they're helping. And I've seen people do things like walk up to someone who's blind crossing the street in Boston and grab their arm and pull them and say, I'm here to help you. That's a safety issue. And they're not helping, right? They've actually put that person in more danger, and that person may no longer have the awareness of where they are anymore in relation to where they were before. So if you see someone asking, can I help you with that? Do you need assistance? And if they say no, cool. Walk away. If they say yes, then ask them, how do you want me to help you? What is the best way for me to do this for you? Communicate normally and naturally. Again, part of this goes back to pity and tone of voice. Part of this goes to things that, you know, if you are suddenly communicating with someone who's deaf, you don't need to scream. It's not going to help, right? Or talking, making sure the conversation you're having is with that person and not their sign language interpreter or an aide or someone else who's with the person with a disability. If I'm speaking to someone who is deaf and there's a sign language interpreter, I look at the person who's deaf. I talk to them. I don't talk to the interpreter. Be patient. As we work to become more inclusive, it requires patience of yourself and growing in this. We're all going to screw up. We screw up at EPIC. No one is perfect, right? So really being patient with yourself and being patient with others. I think what's really important to understand is a lot of, especially young people, but adults as well with disabilities, have not always been given the opportunity to navigate the world and figure out their needs on their own, because everyone swoops in and does it for them. So understanding that and being patient as you work with people to navigate what supports and accommodations they may need. Being aware of sensory factors. So again, sights, sounds, touches, smells can really have an effect on people's ability to participate in the work that you all are doing, right? My cologne alone could make it so someone is not able to participate. The hum of an air conditioner can make it so someone can't focus. And I'm not saying to shut off the air conditioner, but I'm saying to be aware of factors that you can control. So if you're having an event, can it be in a scent-free space, and making sure everyone knows we're scent-free, right? Being aware of lights, and if Epic does some sort of party, we never have strobe lights, because we know that that is a factor that is not safe for everyone. And lastly is to promote self-advocacy and support disclosure. As people who, and I'm assuming to a certain degree, everyone on this Zoom right now, within the work that we do within your families, we all hold positions of power in some way. And there's nothing that could be harder for us than when someone pushes back on us and is a self-advocate. But there is nothing better than when someone with a disability, or at Epic, when a young person with a disability learns how to advocate for what they need, right? And finding that what they need and giving them that accommodation is not always easy, and it's a process. But we need to support people in doing that, and support people in disclosing their disabilities when and where and how they want. Any questions on any of that before we move on to the very last stuff? And then we will open it up for general questions as well.
I didn't see any questions, Jeff.
Okay.
Just lots of different comments, and it's so nice to have lots of the Epic community in the audience to give us some of their experiences related to what you guys are talking about.
Awesome. All right, so then the last thing before we wrap up that we want to talk about is really thinking about post-COVID and what to do. And we kept this very simple, but there's 4 questions we want you all to think about as we all start planning and navigating returning to our offices, reopening our programs, reopening our services to folks. So the first is, what new things have you done that you should keep? So what are the new things you're doing now? I can tell you at Epic, we never offered virtual programming, ever. I avoided Zoom like the plague because I don't like being on video, right? Whereas now we are offering a minimum of 2 virtual groups a day on Zoom. Right? So for us, part of it is looking at and asking, how are we going to continue to incorporate this in our work? Because Zoom does make life more accessible for many people with disabilities. Not everyone, but for many. So what are the things that you've started that you need to keep? What are the things that will stop, right? So although we also may at Epic make it so more people can work from home more often, in the reality, no position at Epic can be 100% working from home, right? If we're doing Service Warrior program days, we need staff there in person, right? But we could have more people working from home part-time. What old things need to be reinstated, right? So as you return, what things need to continue as they were before COVID? What policies, procedures, programmatic things need to come back? Right? And then what old things should we drop? Again, many of us said that working from home was not possible, but we've realized it is. So if we had a policy that said everyone in X position has to be in the office 40 hours a week, maybe we need to rethink that, right? And maybe it is a case-by-case scenario and reasonable accommodations, but we now know that can be a reasonable accommodation, whereas before we thought it wasn't. So really, in thinking about post-COVID, we are all given an opportunity right now to really look at our accessibility and inclusion of people with disabilities, whether it's our policies and procedures, our programs, how we serve people, the makeup of our staff. And these 4 questions, I think, can really help everyone as we enter the new normal in assessing how do we become more inclusive. A gentle reminder, Epic does do consulting and training. So if you need help with this, we're here to help, right? We want to work with folks. We are part of the Worcester community now. We want to make sure Worcester is more inclusive. And that is a community effort. Like Amy alluded to, there was a study that came out last fall that out of 180 major cities in the country, Worcester ranked 169 out of accessibility for people with disabilities. So we got work to do. Boston has work to do. Massachusetts has work to do. But as a Worcester community on this call, it is up to us to come together as a community to figure out how to navigate this together. And we at EPIC are here for that. I'm going to open this up for questions in 1 sec, but before I do, I want to plug an event. We do have Shane and maybe some others now from ZIA who are on this Zoom, but we are super excited to be partnering with ZIA, and on June 4th on EPIC's Facebook page, we will be doing a live event entitled Elevating Youth Perspectives for a Post-COVID World. We have 6 young people with and without disabilities from across the state, from Springfield to the Cape, Worcester, Boston, North Shore, who will be participating in an hour-long panel to talk about how COVID-19 has affected them across the state and what they as young people want to see in a post-COVID world and what their recommendations are. So we really hope that you all will tune in to that, share it on your feeds, but also we are going to be looking for partner organizations. And as partner organizations in this, it's easy. We want you to promote the event, and in return, we'll promote your work in the names of your organizations and your websites throughout the promotion of this event and during the event. So if you're interested in becoming involved in more than just watching the event, please reach out to us. And here is Krystal and I's contact information, our website, all of our social media. And with that, I'll open it up if there is any other questions or comments from folks.
There were a couple questions about the use of service dogs. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Were there specific questions about the use of service dogs?
People are accessibility, I guess, around being able to bring a service dog into places or.
So yes, so it's important to distinguish there is a difference between therapy dogs and service dogs. Service dogs are dogs that perform a specific task for a person. So, and they're trained to do that task. So a blind person who uses a dog as a guide, that dog is allowed anywhere and everywhere. In the doctor's office, in restaurants, folks who have dogs to help reach things and get things and turn off light switches, those dogs are allowed everywhere. Service animals or service animals that are used for more mental health purposes, support animals, there are not clear guidelines around where those animals are and are not allowed. It is important to know that people who have a service dog who are going into restaurants, you cannot be turned away, and they do not need to provide proof of their disability or that dog's training. It is against the ADA to ask for that. But service dogs are allowed everywhere. And then tip for all of us, service dogs are cute. I am a dog person. I have 2 of them. Please don't talk to the service dogs. Please don't touch the service dogs. They are working. If that vest is on or that mouth harness thing is on, they are working. And if you start talking to them, if you ask to pat them, you are distracting them and potentially putting people in danger.
It looks like Ryan has his hand up, Jeff. I don't know if that's an accident or if he has a question. Oh, he just took it down.
It's not an accident. So I actually want to talk about the service dog thing. There's people that of course ruin. There's more discrimination against people with service animals because there's people that take it to the extreme. I don't know if you guys heard there was a woman who tried to bring a service peacock on a plane. Like, those are the things that there was a woman that tried to bring a miniature horse into a restaurant. Like, if you take it too far, that's why there's more discrimination against people with service dogs. And now they think, well, I had to ask for that. I had to kick that bird out. Where are your papers? I want to make sure your dog is legit. Like, so there's a lot of that ruins.
There is a lot of people who try to abuse the system in many different ways. I was actually just reading an article this morning about people who don't want to wear masks right now because of they feel like their rights are being taken away, have started using the ADA as a reason why they don't need to. They are telling people in the stores, I have a disability. I do not need to tell you what it is because of the ADA, and I do not need to wear this mask. That is true. People with certain disabilities and medical conditions do not have to wear a mask. However, we need to be aware of people trying to abuse the system. I like to err on the side of caution, right? If I see a person park in an accessible parking spot and they get out and I visibly do not see a disability, I do not say anything, because you still might have a disability that you should be using that spot for. You may not be wearing a face mask because you may have a medical condition where you can't. So I do, as an ally, like to err on the side of caution here. So I don't want anyone to go out and be super vigilant and start yelling at people thinking that they're abusing a system. But unfortunately, there are people who still do things like that.
Other questions? Anyone else? Or anyone want to talk about Vespers on the, if you want to talk about Zia, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just mentioning a quick little bit about Zia here. We focus on youth and young adult liberation, and focusing on youth and young adults as a social class of people who are impacted and often don't have access or, you know, really a perspective to share or a larger voice in our society to be shared. And I think along with Zia, we do have kind of the intersection here of like survivorship, where we do talk about survivorship in a lot of different contexts. Our parent organization, the Kiva Centers, is a you know, a kind of a psychiatric survivor organization. And something that I always find curious about, you know, disability and accessibility conversations and pieces like that is the conversation between the many different intersections of identity, how people feel like they're more like survivors of the psychiatric system versus someone who would be mentally ill or with a mental health diagnosis and or label, because they don't agree with that label, or the fact that there aren't really biomarkers for many mental health diagnoses, so you can't really quantify it as an illness, and people end up identifying more with the trauma survivorship aspect, and then getting into the conversation of psychiatric disability, where people are saying systems are not accessible to my psychiatric diagnosis and my experiences around my survivorship. So we try to speak to those and try to consider those intersections a lot when working with youth and young adults and people at large.
Thank you. Jeff, somebody had a sort of about advocacy, like ways you could advocate for yourself. I know that that's such a big part of what EPIC does, is to help people be able to really advocate for themselves. And it's so needed and so called for. I don't know if you have any thoughts or suggestions for people.
That's a big question.
Yeah, sorry. That's like,
I mean, quickly, I don't. Because I think there's advocacy comes in so many different ways, and whether it's self-advocacy or advocating on behalf of a community. So self-advocating, we really work with young people around how to be a self-advocate, how to distinguish what your needs are and what you don't need. I mean, a lot of times people with disabilities, the biggest piece of self-advocacy they have is telling someone no, because people are always jumping in and always trying to do things, and really having agency over your own mind and body and being able to say no. And I think that's something that we have to actually remember when it comes to people with disabilities. We are often teaching people with disabilities, you have to say yes. You have to be polite. Everyone is doing things for you. And what that ends up doing in the long term is making people more susceptible for abuse, assault, neglect. So we need to teach young people, or people in general with disabilities, you have every right to say no to anything and everything. It may make, as an EPIC staff, when I ask a young person to do something and they say no, that may make my life a little more difficult, but I'm okay with that. If they have learned that they can say no in this world, then say no. I think that's one of the biggest things, though, what we can do for people and people with disabilities is really assisting them in becoming self-advocates. As far as advocacy within the disability community, there are so many amazing disability leaders at the forefront. There is a rich history. I really encourage you all to check out Crip Camp on Netflix, to check out the documentary Life's Worth Living. If you have no background in disability rights movement, those two films can give you a good foundation to learn more about the disability rights movement. And Life's Worth Living also does a really great job of hitting on all the different demographics of the disability community, from mental health to cognitive disabilities to the deaf community. That video is awesome.
Thank you. I do love how you kind of opened the whole thing with letting people know it was okay to get it wrong, or, you know, kind of say something like learn as you go. We'd love to get this all right, but we are all learning about how to do the best job possible of being accessible and inclusive. I know I've had students that have had, I had a student that was deaf, and he never really told me that I wasn't using captionings until after the semester was over, but that I would have been so happy to make a shift. And I felt, of course, terrible that he didn't, that he suffered through instead of asking me to make that change. So I know that even people that want to get it right, we sometimes mess it up, and we're so grateful that people here are willing to let us know how to do a better job and give us that support. And we're so grateful for EPIC and for you on your birthday being here, giving us this training. It's Jeff's birthday. Just wanted to let you know. Yay, Jeff. Are there other thoughts, comments, questions? If you would like to ask a question, if you don't mind, you can just go right ahead and unmute yourself.
All right. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for this session. Awesome listening to all of you. Amy, thank you. Jeff, it was awesome listening to you. And I have a quick question. You mentioned something extremely deep, if you think about it, that it's not the responsibility of people living with disability to make the society understand and learn about them and know what to do, what not to do. It has to be initiative by society, whether it's through schools, whether it's through the curriculum, however they do it. However, when it comes to empowerment, I'd rather use the word empowerment than advocacy, because probably that should be the root or the basis of, advocating for yourself as a person living with disability. So what is your insight when it comes to maybe, people living with disability, knowing that they're able to communicate that message, that it is not my responsibility to make you understand me. It's your responsibility to take that initiative as society and understand that, you need to learn about diversity just as you learn about culture, just as you learn about politics. So you need to learn about disability too. And how do you, when it comes to the tools, is there any other organizations that you could share that maybe are more into advocacy besides EPIC, so that we are able to know, like, should you be having like a light bulb moment or an aha moment, and you know who to go to as far as empowering people living with disability, so that they're able to not feel like it's their responsibility to try and fit into this box that I need to be here so that I'm not judged. No, they don't need to live that way.
Yeah. So there was a couple of parts to that question. So the last part, as far as other organizations, one of the great things about living in Massachusetts is there's so many disability organizations and organizations that provide services for people with disabilities. So Easter Seals does a lot of great work with youth and adults, everything from leadership programming to assistive technology. So I would check out Easter Seals. They have an office. Their main headquarters is in Worcester. Independent living centers. There's independent living centers throughout the entire state, which all of by their standards, I don't know what word I want to use right now, of independent living centers, at least 51% of their staff are people with disabilities. So this is an organization for people with disabilities, run by people with disabilities. So that would be the Center for Living and Working in Worcester, is the independent living center I would go to. But there's too many organizations, quite frankly, for me to name right now. But there is just a wealth of disability service organizations in the state of Massachusetts. Another one I would like to throw out there is Impact, is an organization we work closely with at EPIC, and they specifically have their Impactability program. And that does Impact in general, teaches self-defense trainings for all populations, but Impactability has classes specifically for people with disabilities to protect themselves and to recognize when things are happening to them that shouldn't be. But they also work with schools and organizations to prevent abuse and not just react to abuse. So what can you do ahead of time to prevent these situations from happening with your staff within your organization? So that's Impact Boston. I want to say their website's impactboston.org. But if not, if that is wrong, feel free to email me and I can send you the correct one. As far as working with the young people that we work with around empowerment and advocacy and leadership, it is definitely a fine line that we walk, because we also acknowledge that the young people who are signing up to EPIC, you are signing on to a leadership program. You are signing on to be a leader in your community. So within that also carries a certain amount of weight of, this is our job. We signed on to it. Just like, this is my job at EPIC. Every time I put on this vest, I have no choice. I have to advocate for people with disabilities. I can't shut that off when I'm at work. So there's a fine line, whereas at EPIC, when they're wearing their EPIC uniforms, you're an advocate for people with disabilities. But when you take off that uniform, it's up to you when and how you do that. Just like, again, with any other system of oppression and how you fall in it, it's up to you of when and how you advocate for that. So usually that's a lot of one-on-one work with a young person of, what are you comfortable with? Are you comfortable sharing your personal story? Because if you're not, you don't have to. Is it easier for you to advocate in this way instead of this way? And so working with young people one-on-one to find the best routes for them that work for them. Amy, I feel like you said something, but you're on mute.
Christine has a question.
Yes, hi everybody. I found at least one way to feel somewhat more empowered that doesn't seem to be quite as threatening as some other ways. But I'll type it in to the chat thing. It's called Central Community Health Partnership. And they have an advisory board, and it's open to anyone on Mass Health who is part of their community. So I personally have a case manager through this organization, and they want people enrolled in services to be on the board. And of all the 700 members that they have, I'm the only one on the board. So it would be really nice to have, and so it's all open to people with Mass Health, which is usually people who don't have a whole lot of resources or money. So some things that I've been trying to talk about are how mail, like checking and receiving mail, is sort of a form of ableism. Just because I had really a home to go back to, so I wasn't getting mail for a really long time. And then just when you're stressed or too depressed to move, it's going to make checking your mail difficult. And then even the notices that you're getting about your insurance sound really threatening when there's emails. And if I'm a person who doesn't want to engage with my world, is terrified of everybody and everything, I sure as hell am not going to get myself involved in an appeal to keep food stamps or to keep my health insurance, because people are terrifying. And then I won't ramble too much longer, but then I was also the person to ask about service dogs. because I don't want to be in pharmacies and I don't want to be going to see psychiatrists. I really want to figure out how to deal with anxiety by bonding, by being activity to bond with something that's not going to hurt me. And that is why I don't think people really understand how the ADA works. Like, I could train my own dog. I could literally get a shelter dog and train it to do something related to anxiety, PTSD, and it fits the ADA requirements, I'm pretty sure. But I'm also not going to try to do that when I don't have the knowledge of that much knowledge of dog training. So those are some things I've thought about, just to, I don't know, keep people out of pharmacies and keep people engaged in something that requires you to learn and bond with a real life creature. Thank you all for listening. I'll go away now.
Thank you for sharing.
You did an awesome job. That was great. Thank you. We appreciate that you put yourself out there like that. Good job.
Thank you to Ryan. Just so you all know, Ryan is putting links to a lot of the places that I've mentioned and others as far as disability organizations in the chat.
That's so great. Thank you, Ryan. Any other questions? I know we are kind of right about at the edge of time. Of course, we're so grateful that you are all here today and really appreciate that you cared enough to get this information and spend 2 hours with Jeff on his birthday and Krystal. Such a good job. Brittany's here. So many people are here from EPIC and that are doing this work and that care deeply about this. And it's challenging to see that people don't pay enough attention to this issue or not really are as aware of this issue about other forms of discrimination and oppression. So we're super grateful. Anybody else want to say anything before we call it a day?
I do want to make one last plug again that we are recruiting for young people to join Service Warriors. So epicleaders.org, all the application info is there, our frequently asked questions. Because of COVID-19 and what's happening, it doesn't have a due date on applications. We're accepting people in on a rolling basis. So we encourage young people to apply earlier rather than later. And that we'll be doing our virtual open house on our Facebook page on Thursday night at 6 if folks do have questions and want to learn more about the program.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff. I hope people go check out the EPIC website. We had Judy Friedman had to get off, but she's pretty well known for her advocacy work throughout Worcester. She's a sign language interpreter. She had lots of comments going through as well, so people probably saw those. I guess that's it, right? Anybody else? Everybody get to say what they wanted to say? And
sorry, I think I got logged off just as he was talking, so it's okay. I'll email should I still need clarification. And again, happy birthday. However, I know there's something I needed to add. You had talked about empowering people with disabilities to be able to say no. And I think what was also, what I also wanted you to include in your answer then was the fact that it's not just about saying no, it's how you say no. Because you have to say no from a very informed angle. You have to say no, like knowing exactly what you're saying no to and for. So I think that's also very important because it's not just about saying no, it's how you say it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when we work with the young people in our programs, we do a lot around making informed decisions, right? And so knowing that when you are advocating for yourself or others, you're making informed decisions. Good or bad things are going to happen from every choice we make in our lives, right? And so being informed about that. And then there is, I mean, for example, saying no, there's a level to saying no. You need to know what level is warranted, right? If I'm asking you to just pass me the cup of coffee on the other side of you, you don't need to scream it into my face. However, if I try to do something inappropriate to you, you have every right to scream it in my face, right? And so learning the different levels of advocacy and how we communicate that. And that again, that's where programs like Impact Boston can be really great. They teach folks again, and they do trainings for not just people with disabilities, they do them for survivors, for the LGBTQ plus community, just everyone. And they're actually offering a lot of virtual free trainings right now. So I would definitely check out Impact Boston. But that's something they do, is work on, as a situation escalates, where does that no start, and how do you change that no if you need to change that no?
Right.
All right. I think we can call it a day. Thank you so much for everyone being here, for your participation, for your information, your positive attention, all of that good stuff. It has been recorded, so we'll make it available if people want to share it with other folks in their agency. We would love to see this get out to a much broader audience. It's really important information. And as we heard and as we've observed, Worcester has some work to do in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks again to everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Our next one, the CASA project, is talking about the child welfare system and child endangerment. So that should be another great topic. Thank you so much for being here. We're really grateful. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Jeff, you were fab.
Thank you, thank you.
That was really great. Thanks so much. Happy birthday. Krystal, you were fabulous also. Thank you so much. It was great. All right. And you guys had a good turnout. Some epic community people were really here and actively participating. That's so cool.
Yeah, there were people in there that I didn't even realize were in there because they started texting me during it. Like Meredith from the board was texting me at one point. So.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. I see Bob is still, I don't know if Bob Bureau is still here, but I was trying to get Bob to join our board.
Yes, and he reached out, and I think him and Delia connected, and then all of a sudden quarantine, stay-at-home things came into place, and I think things may have been put on pause because him and Delia were going to set up a one-on-one like info session.
Oh, good. Okay.
Off the board before deciding whether he wanted to join or not.
All
yeah,
right.
this is Bob. Yeah, I did connect with Delia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now you get a better sense of it, right? So you kind of, we're hoping you might want to join us now that you kind of get more about what it is. He's also on the board for Genesis, so we know, good overlap there.
Yeah. Awesome.
Great. Thanks. Thanks for
Thank
for
you,
the training.
Bob. We'll be reaching
Okay.
out for you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. All right, great. I'll end it now, and we'll let you know where it's recorded, and I'm sure your fan base will grow exponentially.
Fingers crossed.
All right. Thanks again, you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.